Hi everybody and welcome to Tidalwave Studio. My name is Patrick Damiani and today I want to show you a complete mix deconstruction of a song that I made. The actual song is called Voyage Voyage and it was an 80s worldwide hit from the artist Desireless. And I wanted to make a special rendition of that song and I invited a good friend, Marc Maurer, to be the singer for this song, and I made the complete arrangement around it and tried to give it my own twist, make a kind of acoustic version with strings and acoustic guitars and whatever came to my mind. If you want to listen to the song, I link to it up here and down in the description. I made a little video clip about it. It's on my channel as well. But today I would like to show you the complete mix and the complete arrangement. I am really enjoying stuff like this, looking at how do other producers and mix engineers arrange a session, how are the musical arrangements, what effects and what processing are they using. So I thought I might as well share a song that I did myself and maybe you find something useful or interesting in it. So let's dive into it and I show you how the session looks like. Okay, so this is the overview in Pro Tools over the edit window. So you can see I usually organize everything with color coding. So everything which is yellowish here is drum and percussion stuff. Everything which is orange is like bassy stuff. The greens here are aux tracks. Here I have some Hammond and Harmonium. I put it in brownish. All the greenish stuff is guitar stuff. The purple and violet stuff is vocals. And here the blue ones are strings, violins, and all that stuff. And here again, vocals and some effect returns. I would like to start by showing you what I have on the Mixbuss and all the effects, so that when later we come back to the individual tracks, you know that everything is going through that chain. And when I show you which kind of reverbs and effects and delays I have on tracks, you already are familiar with what I use. So I will start with the master bus. As you can see, I have 10 inserts on the master bus. I always enjoy mixing right into a complete Mixbuss chain. That way it saves me from having to add a ton of stuff onto every individual track, because everything already got that sheen and that glue and that color that I got from going into a nice mastering chain, if you want. I always mix as if there were no master, even if there will be a mastering. I always mix as if there were none, so it just sounds the way I like it, and this almost from the start. So now I will walk you through what I have on the master bus. The first insert is a limiter, and it's basically not limiting, it's just leveling, because I will go into an analog chain later, and by using this limiter as basically a dimmer, if you want. Well, I could also use the master fader, but I don't know why I just got used to using a limiter to just pull down volume and feed into that analog chain, which stays pretty much the same, except a few parameters. It stays pretty much set and forget for almost anything I do. Maybe I change DQ a little bit or attack and release time from compression. But apart from this, like thresholds and stuff like this, they just stay the same. And I feed into that chain by choosing how much volume I give into the chain. A little bit like in 1176, where you have input, don't have a threshold on that compressor, but you just feed the compressor with the input and decide how much compression you get by just using the input. So this is basically just for leveling. Next is an EQ. I just rolled off some low end just to clean it up a little bit. And I see that I have a very slight let's call it presence boost. That is switched off right now, but I have it automated. So I think at one point I thought, okay, let's brighten up maybe the chorus. Probably I would brighten it up by just engaging this band on the master bus and give a little bit more shine on the overall mix. Next one is a plugin called Gullfoss. It's basically leveling out the whole signal a little bit. This looks like more than it's doing later when the music is actually playing. As soon as the music plays, it's a very, very gentle curve, maybe adding a dB or subtracting a dB here and there. It's just like a multi-band compressor, if you want, just like leveling out the whole spectral balance a tiny, tiny bit. Next is, this is my hardware insert. In my hardware chain, I go first into a pair of Chandler Harmonium compressors, which add a lot of thickness and vibe to the sound. It's less about compression, but more about all the transformers and the germanium transistors that are built in that just give some color. Next is again from Chandler, the tone control EQ, which has a similar electronic path that it is going through, and obviously it's also an EQ, so it has like a passive section which is like a Pultec EQ, and then there is an active section for high end where I just add 1 dB of air if you want. Then the last step is an API 2500 compressor, which is set very gently at a ratio from 1.5 to 1. So it's really just reducing like a dB or so when it's at full volume. So it's also more about all the electronic components that just give some sound, the op amp in there, and of course it's adding a little bit of glue. And as you will see, I have more stuff on the master bus, and every little element is just doing a tiny little bit, half a dB here, half a dB there, but it just sums up, so you never have that obvious pumping from one compressor, but it's like one is doing a little bit faster, the other a little bit slower, just everyone catching a little bit of something, and all in all, it's really gluing everything together in a nice way. So after this analog chain, I go into a plugin EQ that's just adding a little bit of air. I put it on shelf, 25 kilohertz, and it's just adding some sparkle up there. Next is emulation of another EQ, a Manley Massive Passive. That is, one day I found like a preset that's called Dull Mix Fix. And I liked it instantly. I backed it off a little bit. It's not as, how do you say, I don't add and subtract as much as the original preset did, but I like what it did. So it's just opening up the mix right away, and I don't have to put as much stuff on the individual tracks because of this. Next is another compressor, because we love compressors, and this is the Shadow Hill mastering compressor, and it's really also, when the needles are moving, it's like half a dB. I always set it in a way that it's really like just ever so slightly moving when I'm in the loudest section of the song. So it's just a tiny little bit, like a half a tenth of a gram of salt into a dish. The next is, and I love this a lot, this is a clipper, which is, I always set it so that I can see that the snare drum is just getting shaved off like a dB max in the loud hits. And this is by clipping the signal and catching the snares, it's preventing the next limiter in the final stage from having to do the shaving off the quick transients, and you just get more punchy and transparent snare by shaving off a little bit the snare with a clipper instead of using a limiter only. It just keeps the snare snappier somehow. You really have to try this out. Next is yet another compressor limiter. It's the old FGX from Slade. I love what it's doing. The compressor is actually not doing anything, and I'm just adding a little bit of gain, and it's doing something under the hood. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's I love what it's doing. It's just sounding a little bit fresher and a little bit you can add loudness in a very nice way without destroying the signal, but it's really doing just a tiny little bit again. And at the very last, one final plugin, it's a God Particle. It's a plugin I think Jason Joshua developed. This it is a fantastic mixer, and this apparently emulates his mastering chain that he's using. So I guess I know there is some compression going on under the hood. There is some limiting going on, I don't know what it is, but you put it on and it's really magic. It just brings the mix again to life a little bit. Okay, this sounds like complete overkill, like 10 plugins on the master chain. But as I said, every plugin is just doing just like a tiny little bit, a little bit here, a little bit there, instead of slamming a single plugin or processor to the max and making it very obvious what it's doing. Next thing I would like to show you is all the effect returns that I use. And in this song, it is a little bit less than I usually have, because I always use a complete array of short rooms, long rooms, halls, quarter delays, eighth delays, dotted eighth delays, and then some widening stuff and some special reverbs and special delays. But in this song, it's not that much. I just walk you through what I have. I have one which is called breit, which means like broad or wide in English. And it's just from Waves, the doubler, which basically you feed something into, and one side is pitched down, like, what do I have here? Like 6 cent down, and the other side is pitched up 6 cent, and you have a slight, a slight delay. So whatever you feed into will get delayed and pitched a little bit. And if you add just a tiny bit to the dry signal, you just can make the stereo image a little bit wider, which is really nice on vocals, for example. If you don't want it to be center, but a little bit larger than live, you just feed a little bit into this, and it's just getting a little bit bigger. The next two are just standard eighth delay, quarter delay. This one is another quarter delay, but Valhalla delay, which I love this diffusion setting, which is changing from a delay, like a really snappy delay, to a more diffuse delay, which is kind of as if you would feed the delay into reverb. It's more like a really diffuse delay, which is nice to add a spatial component without hearing obvious repetitions. I really love that one, and it's just like $50 or so, all the Valhalla stuff, and it sounds phenomenal. The next is a plugin that I wouldn't like to miss, especially for more fairy tale atmospheres. It's Valhalla Shimmer. This makes a modulated, splashy, dreamy, reverby thing. I will show you on the individual tracks, and you will hear what it's doing. It's magic. The next one is I have a hardware Bricasti M7. That's a hardware reverb, which is really great, and I use it 99.9% of the time. I use it in exactly one setting, which is room A. It's just a small room. You put it on top of a dry signal, and you immediately get a sense of space. So it's not glued to the speaker, but you just open up a room behind the source, and that's magic, because it's just like you just give depth and a sense of a natural sense of something is really happening in a room, and not like glued to a speaker box. Then there is the last one, an emulation of an EMT 250. This was it the first or one of the first digital reverbs, which was like a big radiator, big heat with yeah, was it from the late 70s, I believe, with big handles to change reverb time and the settings. It's just like emulated, like you can see it here on the screen. And it's apparently the original algorithm from the original manufacturer, EMT, and it just sounds magic. It's really one of my favorite plugins for reverb ever. Okay, then I have just the last thing. I use a signal generator to put a test tone through a mastering chain just to see if left and right channel are matched, because sometimes, not every potentiometer is stepped, so I need to make sure that my mix is centered. So that's all. I just run the signal through the master chain, and I check the return if everything is dead center. Okay, that's basically the effects and the mastering chain. Everything is running through. Now, if you want to know what the song sounds like in complete, just check out the video and watch and listen to the song, so you know how it's evolving over the complete song. And now what I'm going to do is I will go from section to section through the individual instruments and let it play a little bit in context, and then I will solo a couple tracks or one track, depending on what's best to demonstrate what I've done. And then I go through the plugins I used on the individual tracks and show you what I did and why I did it. So I just start right away with drums. I just go from top to bottom, and we see what we have here. In the end section of the songs, I used drums. So let's see what the drums look, what they sound like. Okay, this is a loop that I originally recorded for something else. I don't even remember what it was for, but it was a very, very basic setup. It was 2 overheads, a bass drum mic, a snare mic, and that's it. And I just played like a very little groove, and originally it was a different tempo. That's why if you listen to it in solo, you hear that it's chopped up, and I just matched it to the tempo of this song. But it's I really just used that loop, which didn't have a ton of processing originally, and I thought I liked that sound, and I think I used it as a demo first, and then I thought, hey, it sounds nice in the context, so why not keep it? Let's just listen what it sounds like in context. You can hear all that reverb tail that's on everything to make it dreamy. But okay, back to the drums. So we have this basic loop, but it was a little bit too dry for this context. So what I did is I added a couple samples. Let me see. I think I used two. I used two additional samples which sound like this. So just two different snare samples which have a lot of ambience, and I think on one of them I added a little bit. Usually I don't do this to put a reverb directly on the track. I usually make like with send and return, but here I just needed it for exactly that one source, so I thought, what the heck, and just put it on the track. So just to make that snare a little bit roomier than it was on its own. So, and in combination it gives me this. If I just let the drums alone and then I add in the samples, I try to choose samples that match the original snare in tuning, and of course I try to align them perfectly to the sample so that it just sounds as if it was the original snare. This applies to all the time when you augment drums, that you need to make sure that the tuning of the samples that you use matches whatever original drums you are adding them to. Because if the pitch is completely off, then everything can happen, from phasing to weird sounding. Well, it could be interesting, but if you're going for mostly natural sound, try to really match the tuning to whatever the original drums were tuned to. What else do we have? Here's a little tom fill. There's nothing spectacular. It's just 2 hits. There are no more toms in that song. Here I have a little fill. What did I do here? This was a program fill that actually the singer Marc gave me because he thought, it would be nice to have a little fill there. And I thought, that's cool. Just send it over to me, please. And I just included it. So this is like complete different set and everything, but in context, it worked well.
Voyage, voyage.
Okay, I added some crashes because the original drums, it was just a loop with bass drum, snare and hi-hat. There were no crashes at all, so I just added some crashes. Nothing spectacular here. Okay, what's the next things? I used some tambourine hits to accentuate some of the snare hits. Not every snare hit, but some. Just to give it a little bit change so that not every bar of the drums sounds exactly the same. Just a little bit of ear candy. You don't point your finger at, there is a tambourine hit, but I really love ear candy and just like put stuff just from time to time just to make it a little bit more interesting than if it was just a copy-paste loop all the time. So this is this little tambourine hit. It's very verby. Just an atmosphere thing in context. And I chose to put this in a section where Marc is not singing. So there is space for stuff like this. Usually, often when I get tracks to mix, it's like there are interesting ideas, but they are all stuffed together. So while the singer is playing, there is a fill playing. It's not so good. It's better to just separate stuff in the room and separate it time-wise. So it's like singing, a fill, singing, another fill. So just if you separate everything, everything gets room to exist and it's not cluttering up everything else. So these little tambourine hits, they are just in the vocal breaks because there is place for it. What do I have here? Okay, I apparently added another hi-hat. Just to enhance a little bit because I just had that one groove, it was one track and I wanted a little bit more definition on the hi-hat. That's why I added another hi-hat. What do we have here? In the first chorus, I didn't have real drums, but I used a programmed loop. I just show you what it's in context.
Voyage, voyage.
Okay, I love building loops with tons of different sounds, layer them up and just combine textures from all different kinds just to make something that is kind of unique and just matches the feeling of the song. And this is exactly what I did here. I often use similar sounds, but I combine them in so many different ways that it's never really the same. And by adding maybe one or two elements that are very unique and recorded specially for that purpose, you give it even more uniqueness. But a great way to just create new sounds is by combining them in a new way. Let's go through the individual tracks. By the way, there was hardly any processing on anything that we listened to now. Everything was just like, it basically samples that didn't need a lot of processing. What do we have here? The bass drum is this. It's a very, full sounding, distorted kick. The sample is just like this from some kind of library. What do we have here? A snare. I added some reverb. Again, I needed this reverb only for this one sample. So I thought I might as well put it on the track. Usually I would go with send and return, but since I needed this reverb just for this one track, I put it on. Let me bypass it for a second. And with the reverb. Because I have a lot of space to fill in between hits. I basically wanted the reverb tail to carry on until the next bass drum hit comes, and that's more or less the way I timed the reverb tail, the length of the reverb, to fill the gap until and give it atmosphere until the next bass drum hits in. Then another sample on top. Okay, again, I usually don't put reverb on the track, but for this time, again, I needed just a different setting that matches exactly this one sample, which sounds like this, dry, with a little bit more reverb. Not that much different, but just a little bit longer, just to fill the gap until the next part. What did we have? Oh, okay. Apparently I needed a lot of snap for that sound. What was it without the EQ? Much too dark. I wanted it to be very bright, so that's it. What else do we have here? More tambourines that are stacked on top of the snare. What do they sound like? Oopsa. Solo? Again, it's just like making a big cluster of sounds that all together give me one snare with a lot of character and matching exactly the mood that I was after for that section. Then, yeah, what I use often, I see rain long. I like to use rainmakers as shakers. You know, these big tubes that are filled with little, what is it? Little balls of, I don't know what it is. And usually you have something like, let's say you could build one with having toothpicks that go through that tube. And when you move the whole tube, all these little grains inside, they spiral down between those toothpick style inserts, and it sounds as if it was raining. But I don't use it for this, but I use it as a shaker and sometimes give some accents by letting those little grains inside run down the tube. I show you what I did on this little part here. Okay, let's see what that was in context. Hardly noticeable in the completeness of everything which is going on, but it's ear candy. It's for either for the attentive listener or just subconsciously it's always something new happening. I think this thing is just coming like 4 times in the complete song. It's just a little gimmick to have a sound that was not there before and just comes a couple of times, or sometimes even just one time, and just give you something fresh for the ear so that it's not copy-paste all the time. What is the next here? Peitsche, which is the German name for a whip. Again, I stacked it on top of a snare. So that a couple of hits have a little bit more depth to them. It's just like playing around and see what fits and what matches the situation. I have seen, just if I go back one on this Rainmaker, what I love to do is when I'm using shakers and stuff like this, I like to use distortion. And one of my favorite distortion plugins is by Soundtoys, and it's Devil Lock. This is the Devil Lock Deluxe, where you can mix the dry signal and the processed signal. Let me show you the difference between the original and if I dirt it up a little bit. I put it completely dry for a second. Maybe in solo. So you have a lot of high end and And if you want to beef up a shaker that is just like, and you want it more like, this guy here is exactly what you need. Let me show you the difference between when it's engaged and when it's not engaged. It's very thin and high. It's adding a lot of mid-range, and you get a thicker sound just by adding some distortion from this guy. And the limiter is just making it louder. And here maybe I rolled off the very lows because distortion is adding a ton of crap in the very low register, and if you don't remove this from time to time, it will just clutter up all the mix. So here it's like, yeah, basically I wanted to take that texture of this Rainmaker thing and make it thicker. So I rolled off a ton of high-end stuff, added that distortion to fill up the mids and the low mids, and even EQ'd a little bit more in, so that it's not so abrasive in the highs, but it's warmer and creamier, for lack of a better term. Okay, let's continue. What do we have here? Oh yeah, I think I call this like helicopter. I love to build loops. I call them helicopter because it has it sounds a little bit like a helicopter running. Listen, and you will know what I mean. It's a little bit like from a helicopter. And how I do these is usually I take a hit, I just take a microphone, like something like this, and I take one and put it into a delay that is timed to the timing that I'm aiming for, and then working with feedback of the delay. And sometimes what I do is and this is a cool trick, that I put a delay on the track so that it's starting to get the delay. So I put in a hit, like let's say, and then it's like with a high feedback rate so that it's keeping on going forever. And then I put a send and send this signal back into that track so that you get a feedback loop, and it's starting to build up, just like a feedback that you have on stage when you put the microphone in front of a speaker. So it's feeding back into itself, and it's like exaggerating itself, and then I record a little part, and then I just cut it to the length that I need, and that's exactly what I did here. So it's getting dirtier and dirtier and overdriving and feeding into itself. And this is nice to make some loops, like a hi-hat figure thing, like stuff like this, or in this case to make a transition. Let me show you in context what it sounds like. Very subtle, but it's adding like a gloomy machine kind of sound, like very, very gloomy. I love stuff like this. Here's just some reverse cymbals, nothing dramatic. Here I used shakers. I love to stack shakers. I always stack them. I rarely just use like one shaker, because you can point at, a shaker. It depends on context. If you have like a singer-songwriter stuff where it's one guitar and then you want a little shaker, that may be nice. But usually I want to build like a giant shaker out of different textures. And here I used like a dark tambourine. And again, I used some saturation to thicken it up. What would it sound like without? And with? Subtle, but I reduce the dynamic a little bit and make it a little bit thicker. So saturation is often really good if you have like very percussive or very snappy sounds, or maybe a little bit thinner sounds, and you just want to beef them up. So it's basically like, I always like to compare saturation to like you have a barrel that you fill with big rocks. This is your dry signal. So there is a lot of air in between, and if you want to augment the mass of that barrel with whatever is in there, you have to fill all those voids. So you start putting in some sand or some lighter gravel and then some sand to just fill up the voids. And this is basically, to me, what saturation is doing. It's really like filling up the whole spectrum so that it's making from a more hollow and maybe simpler sound. You just really you fill it up and it's getting more density, and this is also helping you to get a loud mix without having to crank a limiter or something. You just fill up all the voids with saturation and stuff like this, and it's going to be loud completely naturally by itself because it's just dense. It's not loud, but it's dense, and this is perceived as loud. And I love to do this with shaky stuff so that it's not like tick, 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 but it's like it's a thick sound. And even if I need to add again some high end and maybe roll off some lows, you would say, yeah, first you make it thicker, but then you thin it out again. Yeah, but it's about the density as well. So it's reducing the dynamic a little bit, and it's just filling those voids and giving you just a nice thick and round sound without it's so easy to use saturation. And Saturn from FabFilter is great. This would be like a desert island saturation plugin. If I had just one to go, I would take this because you have so many different styles. You have like tube, tape, amp, saturation, transformer, and a whole bunch of creative usable saturation settings. So here I had this, was like a tambourine, then an egg shaker, another egg shaker, and all in all you have... There is just something going on everywhere, a little bit right, a little bit left, a little bit further away, a little bit more up front, so that is great. Here is another, I mentioned before that I use a Rainmaker as a shaker, and here I have a loop that I used, where I used this big tube, this big Rainmaker as a shaker. I love it, it's so dense, because in a small shaker you just have, like a little handful of whatever is inside those grains that are shaking. But in a large Rainmaker, you have like 10 or 50 times more stuff in there. So you get density just by the sheer mass of stuff that you are moving at the same time. So that is really great. That's why I love them. So if you ever go to a flea market or something, people are usually selling them for like $1 or $2. Because they got them somewhere on a holiday, and then it's just standing around because no one is ever really playing with a Rainmaker. But that makes a great addition to your percussion arsenal at the studio. And this was it for all the drum stuff. But what I can mention is that I almost always use parallel compression for drums and percussion stuff, just to add more density without losing the original dynamics. So you have like the direct signal, which is uncompressed, and then in parallel I run all the stuff into very heavy compression and add this in parallel just to get more density. Let me see where we use this. Probably just a second. Okay, just go into this complete loop here, and I will switch on and off the parallel compression so you can listen what it's doing. Okay, now I switch it off, and then after 2 or 3 bars I put it back in. It's not super dramatic, but it's, again, as always, a little bit here, a little bit there. Here you just got a little bit more volume, but you got more density, you got more sustain, because when you use heavy compression, and I use it here in a way with a very quick attack time, that it's shaving off the initial initial transient. So I want to focus on the sustain. So the original transits are enough. And then I add this in parallel and I add more of the sustain of the sound. So I can make it bigger or longer. And it's just a density thing more than anything else in this case. If you want to add more snap, maybe you take a little bit slower attack time so that the compressed signal is very snappy because you have all the transient, and then you duck down a little bit the sustain, and that way you can add more snap to your drums in parallel. In this case, I wanted more sustain, but this is like, a sustain or attack tool. So you can add or more of the one or more of the other by setting the compression appropriately. If you have a quick attack, you remove the transients, and if you have a slow attack, you in context you augment the initial transient by putting down the sustain. So it's just like a lever for sustain and attack by using this in parallel without always having just a compressed sound. Because if you put the compressor directly on all the drums, then everything sounds compressed. But this way you have the natural original sound and you add this texture in parallel. So it's just so much more natural sounding, but you get this compression texture as well. That's great. Okay, this was all the drum stuff. Now we are going to come back with bass. All the bassy stuff is orange here, so you can see we have a bunch of tracks, and this is not because I layer bass stuff on top of one another, but I used different sounds through different sections of this song. Usually, if you want to get a clean and thick low end, it's good advice to not have a lot going on down there at the same time. So usually try to reduce yourself to one bass drummy thing, whatever that is, and one bass guitar-y thing, whatever that may be, whether it's a real instrument or a synth bass or whatever. It's not so often a very good idea to stack bass stuff because it's just getting too much down there. But if you have just like one element that is a drummy thing and one element which is the instrument thing, you can blow them up and let them coexist without having to cut out a lot of stuff all the time. So let us see what we have here. I just go from top to bottom and see what we have. Here I have something that's called bass pulse. Let's just listen in context and then I solo it. This is just a suspense thing for this part. I just, cut out a little bit of mud around here, nothing spectacular. Yeah, this one harmonic part here, it was just too much for my taste in that part. Maybe it interacted with, because I have as a steady pad, I used a Hammond where I used the foot register for the very low octave, and this doom 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 bass thing is in the next octave, and they work nicely together like this. And what did I put on the Hammond? Yeah, okay, I just wanted the low octave from this because I have all the movement and all the stuff from this doom 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 bass, and here I just wanted to fill up a little bit the low end. Okay, I hardly ever use a steep brick wall low cut like this, but for some reason I liked what it was doing. Then I love this little plugin Tremolator from Soundtoys to give signals a movement. If they are very steady, I just give them a pulse, and the limiter is just for leveling. I just pull down the volume a little bit. So let me bypass all that stuff and engage them one after the other so you can hear what was going on. No need for all that hiss up there from the actual Hammond. And the tremolator, just giving some movement in time with the song, while the limiter is not doing anything. It's just leveling. So here I was layering bass, but I layered them not in the same register, and this is important. And it's also like in an orchestra. Sometimes the musicians are playing unisono, the same thing, but usually the sections are in different registers. If they are in the same registers, then they play unisono. They play exactly the same thing, usually, not all the time. There are always exceptions to everything. But since a good arrangement is half of a good mix, I really put a lot of care into the arrangement. And in this part, it's just like one bass is doing the very low octave, and the next bass is taking the next part of the next octave. So they are not cluttering up each other, but here's the one, here's the other one, and they can coexist nicely in the arrangement without having to, without them causing any trouble by one masking the other. They just can coexist and work fine one with another. So what do I have here? I used, I show you in context, the next bass. It was like a bass pulse that I played with an actual bass. Let's listen in context.
Des idées fatales.
So I just have I played it with a pick to have a good attack, and I have nothing on it except a little bit of EQ. So there is no amp simulation or something. It's just the straight DI signal. I added some top end because I played it with a pick, and I wanted the attack of the pick to be audible and not too dark. The bass that I always play, it's more fundamental note oriented. You don't have a ton of mid-range or a ton of high end on that bass, so I needed to boost it a little bit. And then I added a delay just to fill the gaps in between the bass and to make like a nice bass pattern like this. And what I did is I chopped up the return of the delay, because what I often also get tracks to mix where somebody put a delay on the bass, which is not generally a bad idea. But the thing is, the delays, they have like a feedback rate, and then it's especially in the bass, you really have to keep it clean. And if you have like a change of a note at some point and the delay is continuing with the previous note, then it's just a complete mess. If you go up like a half tone or something, but the delay stays on the old note, then you have like a half tone dissonance, and it's just messing up everything. So what I did here is I recorded the return of the delay and just cleaned up everything. So nothing is playing at the same time. It's really alternating between direct signal and delay, and like this, it's really clean and nothing is messy. If the delay was playing all the time, it would just mess up everything, and it's just painful to mix then. So whenever you're using delays, just you can automate that stuff. You can automate feed into the delay. You can automate the return of the delay just to clean up everything. Here there is a little Hammond at the very end, bass Hammond. I just like the texture of the Hammond here. Hammond is a great filler instrument. The one that I'm using, it's a T500, so I don't own a B3, but a T500, and it has a very mellow and thick sound, as you will hear in other tracks too. So it's not this distorted screaming sound, but it's very mellow. And sometimes I say, okay, let's add a homeopathic dose of Hammond to this track, because it's just like it's filling and blending in so nicely into acoustic music. And just like if you put sauce on top of a dish, and it's just like blending everything nicely together. And this is the way I love to see Hammond. It's so organic, and it's moving with a moving speaker inside, and it's just such a pleasant sound and organic, and it melts really nicely into acoustic instruments. Let's see. I will come to the hand played Hammond in the next part. But let's continue with more Hammond on the feet here, and see. I called it Hammond feet tremolo, so I guess I have the rotary speaker on that one. And since it's not such a static sound, like it's always moving and changing a little bit, you just get this organic feeling from it. I really love Hammond for stuff like this. Okay, what is the next? Some more feet, nothing spectacular. Well, actually here I use the tremolator again to time the movement of the bass to the song. Let's see what it sounds like without. Very straight. And I use the tremolator to make it a pulse. Let's see what it sounds like in context.
Chez les blacks, chez les sikhs, chez les jaunes.
Just adding a little bit subharmonic. We have another bass that is played with an electric bass, but this is again just adding the very low harmonic, because it's going pretty deep, that Hammond bass, and it's just nice to fill up the low octave. Here's some more of the same, but just a little different, with a little less deep tremolo for this part, just a little movement. Hardly noticeable, but it's just filling up the very low octave. So what's next? Some more of the same. Another section where I just used a slightly different EQ curve than before. Here in the final part, in the final chorus, I have a picked bass. It's exactly analog to what I had before, like a picked bass with a lot of attack and the delays in between. And here I put the delays on the outside, so you have the main bass pulse in the center, and the delays are very, very wide, as you can hear here. So they get time-wise, they get out of the way of the original signal, and room-wise. So it's just like a big instrument that is spread over time and space, which I liked for that part. And this pulse was very important to me for that song, because it's like in the original, this is like a synth that is playing this da 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 da, and it is what was sticking to my mind always when I was thinking about that song. So I spent a lot of time just figuring out how I would get that pulse done, and the bass is one element of all those to have this pulse of the song, which is for me like the heartbeat of this chorus. So now let's switch to the hands of the Hammond. Funny enough, the video begins when you look at the video when I switch on the Hammond, and it's pretty cool when you have already keys pressed on the Hammond and you switch it on. It's spinning up, and you get a really cool startup sound. Let me show you what that sounds like. And then when you have it, you have perfect pitch and everything, but it's really cool because it's starting slow and it's ramping up in pitch, and I love that effect, and I recorded the switch separately. And I love this warm texture of the Hammond. There is not a lot that has to be done to this. Yeah, I rolled up a little bit of the hiss because it's just hissing like crazy. And a little bit of the low end, because here I'm just focusing on the mid-range for this start section. And then there are just different flavors of the same. different flavors of the same in different sections. Focusing a little bit more on the mid-range. It's like using EQ is always like, okay, you're listening to a signal, it's nice, but something is either missing or something is crowding up something else. So in this case, I thought, okay, I need a little bit more mid-range, and rolled off the top and the lows a little bit just to put it nicely in context. And here I used Transit. That's a nice little plugin. I used the auto pan function just to give it a little bit of movement. Sometimes if everything is static, it's just like everything is glued together. But here I wanted to have a little bit of movement in that part. So it's just slightly moving from one side to another with this auto pan plugin. Then some more Hammonds. And what do we have here? Yeah, this is, I mentioned the pulse of the song before, and I used the bass to give this low end pulse, and I used something really cool on the Hammond to have the mid range and the highs. I play them together, and then I show you what I did. So I used, I recorded two different ranges of the Hammond. And they have like, I don't actually know what that function is called on the Hammond, but you can either play like a pad, like standing chords, or you can engage this rhythmic thing where you can adjust the tempo and the reiteration rate, it's called, I think. And then you have like like a pulse that you can play on the Hammond. And I use this, I think I recorded it a little bit slower, and then I just chopped it up so that it really matched, because you have like a knob to turn, and it's almost impossible to hit the exact tempo of the song. So I recorded it a little bit slower, like 5 beats slower, and then just cut it so that it fit perfectly into the song. And this is the result. So I have like a higher one and a lower one, and I think I also pan them little, one to one side and the other to the other side, just to get a little bit wider image. One side and this on the other side. And the bass in the center. And I love this pulse, and I absolutely wanted to use as many organic sounds as I could without using some plugins or synthy sounds. So and I was happy that I spent quite a bit of time to get this exactly the way I wanted it, but I really love the outcome of it. So the next is actually, I sampled this from a completely different production and tuned it the way I needed it. I originally had just one note of it, but I love the texture so much that I used it for this. It's just such a rich and theatrical atmosphere, and I love that sound, and I thought, I will borrow this from just another recording where we used that, and I pitched it so that it matched the pitch of this song. Now let's go into all the guitar stuff. For the start, I recorded acoustic guitars and reversed them. So I recorded individual note and reversed them and put them into reverb and delays to create a nice atmosphere. I will show you what I did here in context and then in solo.
Au-dessus des vieux volcans, glisse tes ailes sur le tapis de vent. Voyage, voyage.
So I figured out what kind of melody I wanted, and then I needed to play that backwards in my head. So I had to play with a node and then reverse it with a reverser plugin and put it into a reverb and automating some ramps, fade ins and fade outs, so that it's like a very spacey thing. But at the base, this is just an acoustic guitar. And I used a lot of saturation on this to get sustain, because if you hit a chord or a one note on the acoustic guitar, it's like bam, and then it's gone pretty quickly. But I needed a ton of sustain, and I used maybe Devil Lock or Saturn from FabFilter just to use this basically as a compressor and get more or less endless sustain. And then, of course, by adding delay and reverb stuff, you just can lengthen all the notes, because you can make them in a way that they stay basically forever. Then you re-record this, chop it up, and then using fade-ins and fade-outs, you can place it exactly the way you want it in the mix. Or here I blended two notes one to another. Yeah, this is a puzzle game, this thing. But here you see Devil Lock just to add some sustain to the sound. I love building stuff like this and creating atmospheres using the most basic things. It's just like an acoustic guitar, but in the end it's just like a gloomy pad thing. But it's just guitars. I use this all over the track here and there just to add some ear candy. Now the next is a little plucked guitar, just like played with a pick. And as you can see here, there is nothing on a lot of these tracks, so I don't even use EQ or something. I think what is always nice is if you play your instrument in the right context. So you try to have like a balanced mix on your ears and listen to the instrument that you are recording in more or less the volume that you want to hear them later. And then what happens is that the way you play it will naturally fit into the music. If you just pay attention to what's going on around you and you want to have that certain ramp, dun, 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 and you just play it intuitively, and there is no need for a lot of automation, because this is just the way it was played. You just adjust your intensity and the attitude that you want to hear so that it just naturally fits into the song, and then you don't need to do anything. I added some shimmer just to get a little bit of glow. I show you what the shimmer sounds like if it's engaged and if it's off. It's just adding a little bit of fairy dust on top, but except from this, it's just like a plain old acoustic guitar with nothing spectacular going on. Then here the next track is, I called it a guitar snare, because I wanted to add I used the attack of the plectrum of the guitar pick to simulate a snare if you want. I wanted this to be the snare of that part. I show you in context and then the individual track.
Sur les gorges de l'Amazon.
So this is just a guitar, and yeah, this is basically my snare if you want for that part. And then what I also love to do is play a lot of individual notes here and there. So not one guitar is really complex itself. I'm not a great technical player. That's why I always construct more complex things by playing easy individual parts. So it's one guitar is playing one note, the other one is playing one. I can spread them one left, one right, and fill up a whole space instead of trying to play everything with one and then you have just one guitar. So it's much richer and everything is interacting with everything, and it's so live, everything. Let me show you these three additional guitars that I made. In context.
Sur les gorges de l'Amazon.
And there is not a lot going on. I rolled off a little bit. Maybe here I had a little bit too much ring from a string. What do we have here? Also, apparently was a little bit too sharp for my taste. The same here. And then just added some shimmer and it's good to go. And the rest is just like out of the hands into the song. Just played in the right context and tried to just match the ambience that I was after. Nothing really spectacular. Here's more guitar stuff. What do we have here in the final chorus? More layers to this pulse that we had before that. We had the bass, we had the Hammond that made this pulse, and I added some more with some guitars. And this was also really a puzzle game because I tried so many different patterns and until I settled for one that just felt right. So it was like cooking and doing and trying and changing these patterns and slicing them up and moving stuff until it just felt right to me. That I thought, this is the pulse that I was after by combining so many different things. And again, here the guitars, there's nothing going on. I removed a little resonance. This one doesn't even have room on it, so it's completely dry. There is no need to put a lot of stuff on every track. Sometimes just dry and put it there and it's good to go. Because if everything is wet, everything is in the background. If you leave some elements dry and some are wet and some are in between, you just fill up the space between the front and the back. And this guitar just felt nice dry on its own, so it was more in front, and the other ones are a little bit elsewhere in the spectrum. What do we have here? A little atmosphere guitar. I really love that line. You cannot really hear it that well because there's so much going on, but it's just adding, again, a tiny little bit of something to the overall atmosphere. Then, for me, was important these big chords here. They just give the fairy dust. And here I put a quite big amount of effect on it. So there is some bricasti, some quarter delay, bram, 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 that's trying to keep that chord going for quite a while. Some shimmer, this fairy dusty reverb, some of this more diffuse quarter delay, and some no EMT 250. It seemed to have been enough. So alone on their own, if I just cut off the delay for a second. And if I put it on, it's just so much more mystical, and the notes are standing there for a while and filling up nicely all the space that we have. What do we have here? Yeah, here's an interesting little fill where I mangle the guitar into what it is now. It's very diffuse. I think that was originally, I played it just with an acoustic guitar, but then it was too much, someone is playing an acoustic guitar, and it was not interesting enough to my ear, so I put some distortion. Obviously, I cut off all the high end and probably some saturation, some Devilock, some compression, some stuff, a lot of delay, and this is what it ended up, just like a ghost the ghost of the melody that I originally played. Here, I don't know if you know that instrument. It's called waterphone. I once recorded this with a friend of mine, Christian Auer is his name. He has a waterphone. It's like, how do you describe this? It's a metal little bowl filled with water. Then you have like metal rods attached to them, and you can play them with a bow. And when you move that whole thing, the water inside is moving and it's changing pitch all the time. And it's such a beautiful sound. And I used one sample of this here. So these rods have different lengths and different pitches, and you just play them. It's just like this screechy. I love this sound, and it just was exactly what I needed for this little transition here. This comes just once in the whole song, and it's again this little ear candy thing. You get something interesting in every section that has not been there before. Here we have a little fill. Just once that I played a normal guitar in this. Usually in this song is always the violins. Originally I had played them with the guitar. I played the glissando like this, but then I thought, it has to be violins, because I had this sound in mind, and fortunately we got it exactly the way that I wanted it. But this was the last fill that remained from all the fills that I previously played and replaced everything one after the other. This is pretty much everything the guitars play, so a lot of little puzzle pieces that get together as a one big thing. Here I have like a backing vocals that I recorded as almost everything was done. So this is the replies to the main vocals. So this is like a stack of a harmony stack. Usually I doubled the vocals so that it's like a little Patrick choir, and there is not a lot of processing going on here. Probably, yeah, I wanted it breathy, like little fairy choir, and then I just added some shimmer to make it. I think if I play this without, it's very boring. Let me see if I am courageous enough to play it without. Oops. Voyage, voyage. Yeah, so it's boring if there is nothing on, and the shimmer is just like putting everything into a magic space. And here there is also a little glissando. I think before we had the violins, I also did it with vocals just to give a guide to Nikos, the violin player. And eventually I kind of liked it, and I left a couple of those in. So I cut my balls off and did this little falsetto voice to simulate what I wanted him to play. The glissandi I wanted him to play on the violin. I just emulated it by singing them, and eventually I kept a couple of those in. And they are interchest. So there's violin, and then it's the choir, and then it's the answer. It's always moving. So the arrangement in this song, I really love it because it's moving all the time. So if I play this little section here, nothing is ever coming in the way of something else. Everything is always alternating and leaving space for the others to play. So now we have like a shitload of violins that were very, very important in this song, and I merged all the tracks together so that I got some kind of overview, because it wasn't, I don't know, like 50 or 60 tracks of violins. Let me see if I can unfold one of those. Here you see all the folders. If I open up one of these folders, you can see it's just like triple, quadrupled, every single voice of every violin played in different in different positions on the fretboard to give different sounds. He used violin or even two different violins and one viola just to get different textures so that it sounds like a little orchestra. And I really love how it came out. Nikos is a fantastic violin player. I don't know, we recorded over 100 songs, and that's not even enough. I think we just recorded like 100 songs just for Sopor Aeternus together, and plus all the dozens and dozens of projects. So we have like one brain. I just let him know an idea that I have, and he instantly gets it and knows, okay, let me do this and that and that. And we had like a remote video recording session. He recorded it at home, because he's living in Greece, and it was great. We did all these violins like in one morning, and it just turned out fantastic. Let me just solo one or two parts, and there is nothing really going on with these violins. I just put them all together so that I combined like 12 tracks to one stereo track to get a little bit easier access. Instead of having to manage so many different tracks, I just combined them to stereo pairs, and it's easier to handle. But there's really not a lot going on here. I rolled off a little bit because it's very high violins. And here's some lower violins. Oops, sorry. And here I added some R bass, because if I remove it, it was a little bit too thin for my taste for that section. I wanted more meat, and this is adding like subharmonic content. So that you could get the idea, maybe it was a cello that was playing along and not just a viola down there, just to get a little bit more meat. But except from this, it's just like out of Nikos' hands, straight into the computer and straight into my session. Ah, I love those glissandi here. Here I spread them over a couple tracks so that they are overlapping just in the exact way that I wanted it. But this was really like 50 or 60 tracks. And to me, this is my personal highlight of the song. It's obviously the voice is fantastic. Marc did a great job, but those violins, they almost bring tears to my eyes when I listen to them. And except from, a tiny bit of EQ, there is not a lot going on. It's a little bit of EMT 250 and that's it. It's just a little bit of EMT 250, and they just sit nicely in a room, and that's it. So then Harmonium, an instrument that I bought for €50 at the flea market, and I love it. It's like a foot-operated organ, where you have like little metal, how do you call it? Metal lips that are moving with airflow and producing a sound. It's like basically like a, where's my English? An accordion, bandoneon thing, but foot operated, and you have like a, when you see it in the video. You play it like an organ, but you move air by pushing air with alternating foot movement, harmonium. And what I love to do is to make it wide. I play one note at a time and then combine them and pan them left and right. So this is one, and you can hear the squeaking of the pedals in the background. I tried to use spectral editing here. I see in the file RX9. I used it to remove a little bit of because the pedals are screeching, and there is no way for me to get rid of that. But sometimes I embrace it, because you hear that it's a real instrument, but I reduced it significantly in volume. And this is in the end section just to add some texture. And there's just yeah, I think I just put a little bit of EQ on it, but except from this, there is nothing going on these tracks. Then some more harmonium. I combined it to one stereo track because I used like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 different notes. And I didn't play the chords all at once because it would have been a narrower image. So by playing them individually, I could just pan and spread them the way they felt great in the mix. And I combined them to one stereo track. And that's it. And there is nothing on there. There is no reverb, nothing. No need to mess up stuff that is just working like this. It's just putting itself in context nicely. Now to the vocals. This is the very last and most important element. There is not a lot going on here. I did all the backing vocals, but the main vocal, it's never doubled. There are no doubles or triples or stuff like this. It's just one lead voice and that's it. And Marc did such a fantastic job. He's singing in French here, but I think he hadn't spoken French for 20 years or something, but I knew he would do it. And to me, he really nailed it and put so much emotion into it. This is the driver of that song, this vocal and the emotion that is putting in. Now I can only show you the 2 or 3 little technical things I did, but I will also show you the naked track, and it's just as spectacular as in context. So let me solo just one part of the verse here.
Devant d'Espagne en pluie d'Équateur.
So effect-wise, I just put on some Bricasti, so a little bit of small room, a little bit of EMT 250, some shimmer for this glowy reverb, and a tiny bit of this diffuse reverb. Let me just remove it for a second so that you hear the raw track.
Devant d'Espagne en pluie d'Équateur.
I recorded it very dry, so although the recording room is a little bit larger, I usually put some mobile absorbers around solo singers to keep the instrument dry and focused, and then I have all freedom to add whatever ambience I choose to put on in the track.
Devant d'Espagne en pluie d'Équateur. Voyage, voyage.
Okay. Plugin wise, I love this EQ with this air band. It's a Mac EQ, and you can choose 40 kilohertz, which is basically out of the audible range, but it's such a gentle slope, that EQ, that it's coming from 40 kilohertz down ever so slightly into the audible range that we are able to hear. So I just put a tiny little bit of air on the vocal. Next is just a little low cut in case that we had some rumble. It's more like, I just put one to be safe so that there is no rumble down there. The very stock compressor, Pro Comp from Avid.
Devant d'Espagne en pluie d'Équateur.
Just like kissing the peaks, like a dB max. Then I use Soothe. This is like a kind of dynamic EQ compression thing that you can either put full range and it's just evening out all this the spectral information a little bit, or you can use it to specifically work on certain parts of the frequency range. And I love this because sometimes a signal is a little bit too harsh, but not all the time. If I just EQ it down, then it's getting dull like this. But I just want it to work when it's exceeding a certain amount of, let's say, brightness, for example, or muddiness. If it's good in general, but just sometimes it's just a little bit too much, then Soothe is great because it's like a compressor with a million little frequency bands, and it just ducks down when it's just getting over a certain threshold. And I used sorry, that's the doorbell. And it's just I use 2 of them. I have one for the high frequency range for the treble stuff, and one for like mid-range around 1K, and I show you how much or how little it's doing.
Devant d'Espagne pluie d'Équateur. Voyage, voyage.
It's just like a dB or something, just evening out just a little bit. It's just making everything a little bit round. I like a compressor that is just going into certain frequency ranges. And then, yeah, a tiny little presence boost up there, and a limiter just for leveling. It's not it's not even catching the peaks. It's there's hardly any compression. What I did on the vocals, and this is when I have the time and really want it to be as perfect as it gets, the first thing I do is I go into the track with clip gain. So this syllab is a little bit too soft. I just clip gain it up a little bit. I show you what I mean by this. For example, if I go in here and I say, this is a little bit too loud or too low, I just go in and fix it a little bit. So as you can see, this is the raw track, and I leveled it out quite a bit because it was more dynamic originally, but I went in like this and worked on the S's and on the K's and on the T's, because usually many singers is like T. A T becomes almost an S instead of T. It's T, and this is just too much. The microphone picks this up more heavily than our ears in the natural room, and it's getting really abrasive if you don't control these. So what I did is I went after every consonant through the whole song, and then just pre-leveled everything so that whatever I'm feeding into the compressor is already tamed a little bit. And then with soothe and all that stuff, it's just like it's very gentle, so the vocals are very, very natural, and there is not a lot of stuff going on the track itself, but it's more like a little pre-work, and of course the performance that was very, very steady itself. And that's about it. Well, it's a lot of stuff actually. If I scroll through the session, it's really a lot of stuff going on, but not always a lot at the same time. So there's a lot of different sections, and every section has like its own instrumentation, if you want, its own percussion thing, its own drum thing, its own bass thing, so that every section is unique in its way. And processing wise, there is not a lot, some corrective EQ, a lot of saturation and all that stuff. And then at the end, it's going through that wonderful mastering chain, as I want to call it. And it's this is keeping the mix alive and glued together. And it's just working magic on the whole thing, instead of having to go and brighten up or fix every individual track. So I can only recommend you to give it a go if you don't already do this, to have like some compression, limiting, and maybe embellishing EQ on the Mixbuss right from the start, and work into this a little bit like backwards. And maybe if you come to the drum bus, instead of trying to or start working on EQing the bass drum right away, maybe try to put some parallel compression right away and use some EQ on the main drum bus and see how everything works together. And then if you see that you need to fix an individual signal, you start big and go more and more in detail as needed, instead of starting in the detail and losing the bigger picture of everything. This is maybe the best mixing advice that I can give. Like, don't listen too much in solo, listen more in the context. And also when you record, listen to the context. Don't record and put your instrument so loud that you would never want to hear it in the mix, but play it at the same volume as you want to listen to it in the mix later. And your performance will adjust automatically, hopefully, to the circumstance and the bigger picture of the song. And also with mixing, if everything is already where it's supposed to be, more or less, you will see that you will use less processing and maybe less reverb and less stuff, because you're not soloing the stuff all the time and you think, ooh, this bass drum is too thick or too thin or too whatever, this guitar, it's a little bit too mid-rangey. Yeah, but if it works in context, it doesn't really care how it sounds individually. because no one is ever going to hear it in solo unless it's a solo part. You know what I mean. So yeah, less is more sometimes, but sometimes more is more. Okay, that's a great end word. So I hope you enjoyed this walk through a complete arrangement and processing thing. And if you liked it, let me know. I would enjoy. And if you want to see more stuff like this, consider subscribing to the channel, and see you in the next episode of whatever I come up with. Bye bye.